There's a kind of pain that hides in plain sight. It's not bruises or broken bones. It's the ache of being told your deepest self is dangerous. It's the fear that your questions make you wicked. It's the shame of your body or your thoughts or your instincts. It's spiritual trauma. And for a long time, I didn't even know I had it. Today, we're talking about the invisible wounds left by religion, how they form, how they fester, and how they slowly can begin to heal. This is not an episode about belief or disbelief. It's about the cost of belonging or the cost of fitting in, and what it takes to reclaim yourself when the price was your soul. Next on Almost Awakened.
Healing begins in the body, but awakening touches everything: relationships, purpose, identity, pleasure, and truth. Join Bill Reel and Teresa Hobbs as they explore the real work of becoming a healthier you. Welcome to Almost Awakened.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Almost Awakened podcast. I am one of your hosts, Bill Reel. I'm joined by my co-host, Teresa Hobbs. How are you doing, Teresa?
I'm doing good.
Excellent. As the open there showed, today we're going to talk about religious and spiritual trauma. I have to use both those terms because most of what we talk about happens within the framework of religion, usually unhealthy religion, but I think all religions to some degree do some of these things. And it's not just religion, it's sometimes in spiritual systems. It could be a yoga class, for instance, where these kinds of abuses take place. And so it's not just inside religion, it is also inside spiritual systems. And we may not even think of some of those systems as spiritual. They may be self-help groups. They may be exercise groups. They may be fitness groups that get together to just keep each other in shape. And these kinds of abuses can take place all over the place. Anytime that you have a group of people with somebody at the head who is in some form of authority, or a group of people at the head who have some form of authority over the group, there's always the risk that these kinds of things can take place. But before we jump in, I wanted to give you some time to set some helps people set some safety boundaries for this episode.
Yeah, so this is a tender topic, and I think it's going to connect with a lot of your listeners because many people that listen to you do have spiritual and religious trauma. And I want to just invite people to stay connected to yourself, to monitor your own bodily responses. And if you feel activation, just know that that's normal. As Bill and I were talking about this the other night, just in preparation for what we were going to say, I was surprised by how much came up in me. I have worked with this to some degree, but was really, really impacted just by kind of revisiting some of these things. So, take some time for yourself. We were going to record yesterday, and I told Bill I needed the day off, so I let myself do a little bit more resting. So if things come up for you, just give yourself some space and be tender with yourself.
Yeah, and if you need to listen to this episode in chunks or bites, or if this episode is so overwhelming that you just need to set it down and come back to it at a later time, or maybe not at all, then do what's best for you and take care of yourself. We ought to start. We defined trauma last week as not the things that happen to you, but how your body and mind process the things that happen to you. And we had a conversation around that. And so we need to sort of set a framework for what is religious, spiritual trauma. It's the same things we talked about last week, except they're happening within a religious paradigm. And it's not just an abusive parent who is shaping the way that you see this event. It's not just the traumatic event itself. For instance, if you were at ground zero at 9/11, using an extreme example, but this is when you're in some sort of group dynamic where someone in authority is exercising that authority over you and sets expectations, boundaries, limits who you can be and how you can show up. But in doing that, this again is how your body and your mind respond to those. I want to give you some time to talk about complex trauma. Is there anything else you want to say about defining religious or spiritual trauma before we do that?
No, I'm going to kind of define that as I talk about complex trauma. So if we can pop that up on the screen, thank you. So it's important to kind of be able to connect spiritual and religious trauma with what is defined as complex trauma. And complex trauma is something that happens, it's an ongoing emotional, psychological, or spiritual harm. So it's something that's cumulative, that happens over time. And it's something that's, repeated. And so there are often aspects of power imbalances or betrayal by trusted figures, whether that's a parent. So in early developmental trauma, this happens, or by members of the clergy. In complex trauma, you often have limited access to escape, your own autonomy or support, and then early life experiences that interfere with identity formation and safety, which definitely happens in spiritual systems. And so, why religious trauma often is complex trauma is, again, it's often tied to childhood development, where your trust and identity are being formed. And thinking back to how we learn about the world and our place in it, and what life means, like, so many of those fundamental teachings come from your church if you grew up in a religious institution, and it can have a profound impact on how you perceive yourself. And then religious trauma is reinforced by community, doctrine, family systems. So it's everywhere. It's everywhere you look. You are. It keeps being affirmed in your culture, in your community, whether it's healthy or not. And then the teachings of religions are often internalized, and this creates this sense of needing to be a self-policer, and these are often fear-based systems. So complex trauma is less about what happened, just like regular trauma, but it's more about the experience, what the experience did to your internal world.
Can
And
I just
sorry.
add here? When we talked about trauma last week, let's just say somebody is born and raised in an abusive home. You have mother and father, and let's say the dad's abusive. Let's say the mom just lets it happen. She gives sort of tacit approval because dad is so strong-willed and so heavy-handed that she is afraid to challenge him. You grow up in that dynamic, and you're born into the world, and you have no way to make meaning of anything, and this is the only way you have to make meaning, and your family is so close to who you are and the time that you spend with the outside world that you this early development is forged by who these people are and how they interact, and you think that's what the world is.
Yeah.
I think religious trauma in this respect is worse, because not only does your believing parents endorse and validate and perpetuate this religious paradigm, but then you go to a community on Sunday, and it's the only community you know when you're young.
Yeah.
And they are also going, yes, this is true. This is the thing that we do. And so more than just standard trauma, standard abuse, when religious unhealthiness shows up, everyone around you that you trust is conveying to you a message that these are the rules by which the world works by. And I think it is then so much more difficult to unravel that.
It totally is, and that brings me back to my experience. So I grew up with parents who were inactive, and I grew up in a community that was like 90% Mormon. And I had my own family upbringing, and then I started going to church at age 12 or so, and that's where I formed this other perspective of what was good and bad, what people were good and bad. And it was reflected by everybody in that community. So, I had my family upbringing, but then suddenly I realized, like, oh my gosh, like, the rest of the world actually lives this way, or they believe this way. And that had way more weight than my own internalized family upbringing. And so I started to perceive my own family as bad and not good people. And I also internalized a lot of shame about who I was coming from that family, in extension to being part of that family. And so, yeah, I think it has an incredibly powerful effect, way beyond even just the family system.
Yeah. Yeah. That's all I wanted to add. So I'll let you go to the
Yeah.
next slide if you want to.
So these are just specific themes in high demand fundamentalist religions, including Mormonism, obviously. And so, it's the absolute truth claims, one path to salvation, one authority to trust. And, if there's only one truth, then there is a deep feeling of, like, being wrong. There's this fear of being wrong all the time. Obviously, one that we're very familiar with in Mormonism is the purity culture. So emphasis on sexual purity tied to personal worth or divine love. This leads to lasting shame, especially around, your body, your sexuality, and gender roles, and especially for, I think this impacts boys, but I think it impacts girls even more so, and also people who are LGBTQ plus, because when you are different, or the things you're told are really bad, are something internal to you, it makes it that much worse. I don't know what's your perspective on the difference in purity culture on boys versus girls.
I think most, again, not all, there's going to be exceptions to the rule, but most unhealthy religious or spiritual systems are, the authorities are men, and the systems are generally patriarchies. So it makes perfect sense to me that men are going to have more privilege within those systems, and anyone who is a minority in terms of being a female or doesn't fit the standard cisgender heterosexual male, such as the LGBTQ plus community, are going to be impacted to a greater degree. So I agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I don't know, I think that there are subtle, I don't know that they have this in current literature, and I don't know if they've even had it in historical literature, but there's this subtle communication that, like, women need to be careful that they don't tempt a man, or tempt, someone into sinning by exposing their body too much, or you know what I mean. So then it becomes the responsibility of the female to keep a man pure, which I think is really messed up, and yeah, not okay. So the other thing is, another theme in high demand religions is this idea of obedience and perfectionism. So, high emphasis on external behaviors, worthiness interviews, and the idea that obedience equals safety and love. And this is huge, 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 and specifically the Mormon Church. I don't know. We were talking to some people last night about their experience in the church and what the deepest harms were for them, and one of them said it was the perfectionism that came out of it, and I connect with that as well. Like, it was like perfectionism, and also this constant need to control everything. And I also developed like obsessive compulsive behavior from this drive to have to be perfect, or have to control things, or have to be perfectly obedient. Yeah. So, and I don't know, again, how that may affect girls versus boys. Certainly, we were actually having this conversation at the table, because um, the husband was saying how, he didn't have that problem at all. Like, he doesn't worry over things. He doesn't get caught up in how other people are going to feel. And I was thinking about how that might be connected to the difference in how men and women, sort of the expectations on men and women in the church, and how that sort of plays out there. Because women are expected to be the caregivers, the caretakers. They're expected to do all their Relief Society stuff, and support, like constant support. And men get to sort of hold these positions of authority where they don't have to worry so much.
At least in the system that we came from, for men, there's a lot more emphasis on what they need to do. And with women, it's a lot more what they need to take care of.
Yeah. Yeah. And not to say that men don't have burdens, because I mean, anyone who has held the position of bishop would know how much sacrifice is being asked of them. So the other theme is spiritual bypassing. So emotional pain is often reframed as lack of faith, sin, or not praying enough, which ignores real trauma and psychological needs. And this happens in all kinds of communities, not just high demand fundamentalist religions, but this also happens in other spiritual communities that, push this idea of like high vibration, and, high vibes only, and that your thoughts and emotions are going to affect your ability to manifest. And so it's this idea that you can only be in a positive emotional state, and all negativity needs to just be ignored or bypassed or overcome on some level. So that is very, very damaging.
I'll only add here, it made me think of another kind of bypassing that I think needs to be stated on the front end of our conversation. And I'll call it growth bypassing. And what I mean by that is most religious systems have a set of rules, especially high demand fundamentalist religions. So if I use Mormonism as an example, there are all these, you pay your tithing, you don't drink coffee, you go to the temple, you do your visiting teaching, home teaching, which is now called something else, ministering servants. You have all of the rules that you need to check boxes on and having done. And that communicates to you that the path to growth is checking off items of a list, when in reality, real progress, real growth is inner work that is not tied at all to a checklist of things that religious systems give. And so what happens is you end up going years, if not decades of your life, skipping the actual work that leads to progress and growth.
Yeah.
And you end up seeing progress and growth in a way that's not how the rest of the world would naturally define it. And so you stunt yourself, you end up paralyzed in the place that you're at, whereas the rest of the world is moving through life, if they're taking advantage of it, growing and progressing because they're doing the work, whereas a good Mormon or a good religious follower of a system sees themselves as being successful for a whole nother set of reasons.
Oh yeah, and if you read your scriptures more often, then this will, counter whatever feelings you're having, or if you have doubts, then just read your scriptures more, or do more good works or whatever it is, and you're taught that is going to that's going to answer the problem, whatever it is you have, or this anxiety or some emotional issue, and I can see how that actually connects into sort of OCD, right? Like where people get to the place that they start doing things so obsessively, so much in this hope that it's gonna help whatever they're feeling inside, and it just doesn't, and it just magnifies all that.
Yeah, and you connected the two because you just named some thought stopping techniques, and that is another form of spiritual bypassing. That rather than be allowed to feel or think the things, you're being trained in mechanisms that skip over that and get you back to the starting position of the church is true. I just need to move on.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So the next theme is loss of autonomy. So members are told what to think, feel, wear, say, read, or how to vote. And women in particular may be taught to distrust their own voice because they don't get one often, at least in patriarchal religious orders. And yeah, and I think, I'm thinking back to, so after I got out of the church, I kind of spent some time in, exploring other spiritual things. And then, I don't know, like 2017 to like 2020, I was really heavily exploring kind of the new age movement because I was, chronically sick and I was trying to find some healing. And I remember being in a lot of these new age circles where people were just so desperate to have somebody else tell them what was true, and so you just substituted the prophet for some other new age guru, and but the thing is the same, is you are outsourcing your truth to somebody else. And I don't know if those people, I mean, I came from a Mormon background, so maybe that was part of why I was there, but I also think it's pretty common in trauma in general, when you've been disconnected from yourself, from other traumatic experiences or developmental trauma, where you are more prone to outsource your authority to somebody else. But yeah, the structure of these fundamentalist religions put you in a position where you are not encouraged to think for yourself, or even ask questions in many instances. You are just there to be told what is true.
Yeah, it reminds me that questions are bad. Questions lead to doubt. Doubt leads to disbelief. Disbelief leads to some severing of you from the tribe. So the system trains you that where you should think that you are lucky is that you have the answers. You've got the certainty. You know how all of this works. You know what God's plan is. You know how to get back to him. And so joy is in the answers and in the certainty, and sure as hell not in the questions. And then also in terms of loss of autonomy, I think it's important to note that almost all unhealthy systems ask you to give up your autonomy and to be part of a group, and all of the group behaving, thinking, doing in the same manner is how the group stays on track. And it just reminds me that in these systems, you're often just a cog in the machine, and you think you're special. You think that, I'm in the one true church. I'm in the one true path. But the moment you start to look different, sound different, act different than everyone else around you, there are punishments that are in store for you. And the best thing you can do is keep your head down and be what the system wants you to be and represent it the way it says, and be just a cog in the machine.
Yeah, absolutely. The other theme is outside fear. So a worldview where outsiders are deceived, dangerous, or pitied, which can create this isolation and difficulty forming healthy connections. So, yeah, this is I think something that I also experienced because, again, when I started engaging with the Mormon Church at the age of 12, I started to see like, oh, my family's really bad, and people who smoke are bad, and people who do these things are bad, which made me perceive other people outside of the church as wrong or bad, like they just were somehow bad people. And when I was 19, I went to work at a river rafting company in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and it was my first exposure to people outside of Utah. Really, a lot of people came from all over the country, and I got to spend 4 months living in a tent and just getting to know different people. And that was kind of my wake up moment where I realized, wait a minute, like you can be a good person and not be a Mormon. Like these people are really good people. And it just kind of broke me out of that trance of recognizing or thinking that everybody outside of the church was bad or wrong.
This is heaped in extra doses to anyone who converts, because you're also asked to alienate yourself from your family. So in your situation, you and I have had conversations. We were just talking about this last night. Your parents weren't living the status quo Mormon life. They were doing things in a way that Mormonism and its rules would frown upon them. So you also had to endure some of this as well, which is to see that righteousness in your system isn't matched by the character or behavior of your family members. Well, for a convert, it is so stark. My parents weren't Mormon. My aunts and uncles weren't Mormon. My brother wasn't a Latter-day Saint. And the church taught me that they were these things, that they were broken, they were sinning, they were not living God's plan, they'd rather sin than have curiosity about the truth. And it taught me to distance myself from my parents. It taught me to distance myself from my brother. It taught me to distance myself from my friends and extended family. And it is a toxic thing. And only in the last few years have I really started to unravel that and go back and look at who my family was, how they behaved and acted. And I'll get to that later when we talk about another part of this conversation. But I was taught to see goodness as bad and badness as good. And that is such a tricky thing when you've got reality being twisted on its it's a form of gaslighting in a way. You have reality sort of twisted on its head, and you're taught to see the world the opposite of what it actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then the final thing is this idea of, leaving the institution is a betrayal. And this is where it shows how deeply unhealthy an institution is if they have, shaming or shunning or disconnection. And this is quite common in Mormonism. I mean, I think there are some families that are more open and accepting, but there are others who fear the what is it called when someone the apostate? It's been a long time since I've been in Mormon lingo, but yeah, so they fear the apostate because they feel like it's a disease that's going to catch them as well, and so they shut out the people. And I know this happened to you as well. Like, when you finally left or when you were even questioning, I think so many people disconnected from you who you thought you belonged to, but only if you believed the same things.
Yeah. Religion, and part of this is just human. This isn't just occurring in religious systems, but much of our humanity is tied to so long ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago. And part of survival 100,000 years ago was to stay together in a group, in a tribe. Because if you were on your own, you were nowhere near as capable to survive out in the wilderness or on the wild frontier, with animals and terrains and climates that could change at any moment or could surprise you and catch you off guard. And uh, many of the animals that we would hunt, for instance, one on one would be a danger to us, and we would have to chase them in groups. And religious systems play on that. You sense in you this need to be part of a group. It's been part of you for hundreds of thousands of years. And you sense how important it is to uh, sacrifice something about yourself in order to belong to a group and to have the safety of that group. And the religious systems come along and they say, if you're not careful, you'll end up as one of those people, and then we won't accept you anymore. You'll be dangerous to us. You'll be a threat to us. And that often is all by itself enough to compel us to compromise important parts of ourselves in order to fit in with the group.
Yeah. And my thought on this is like, as we, I think that that's embedded in us for sure. But as we evolve as humans and we have less and less true actual threats in our lives, so we have the time that we can sit and uh, sit with curiosity and grow and expand. I feel like there are we now have the capacity to have a system where a group of people that have a healthier way of interacting and relating, where autonomy is allowed, where people can have, like I was reading up on what religious systems are healthy versus unhealthy, which ones are the most healthy, which ones are the least healthy, and what qualities they have. And the qualities that are there for the healthier systems are that they allow doubt, they allow free thinking, they're inclusive, it's low on judgment and authoritarianism, and yeah, and I think that we are in a place where we can actually um, function in that way, and we can have healthy groups versus unhealthy groups. Whereas I know that it is an inherent driver within us, but I think that as we evolve as humans, we're sort of learning to um, become aware of those things and evolve beyond them.
Yeah, I love that. And the slide on the screen is expressing this from the point of view of what the person is feeling, behaving, experiencing in the system. I'll just note that the system is intentionally, on some level, this could be conscious or subconscious within the system, but the mechanisms are chosen by the system because they work. And while they might be named different and defined slightly different from system to system, unhealthy religious systems almost always use the same basic tools. And I'll just note here, in terms of the system carrying out the unhealthy mechanism: shame-based control, suppression of individuality, threat of eternal punishment, emotional manipulation, conditional love or community. And so that's what the system is bumping into us with. And then what you see on the screen is what we feel or what we're experiencing that leads to uh, something unhealthy developing in our life. Anyway, I just wanted to note that. And then I know the next thing you were going to do is tell us about the impacts of religious trauma.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly go over these. These are just different, mental, emotional, and somatic impacts, nervous system impacts. So, mental impacts obviously are it puts a person in a position where they're going to have more black and white thinking. This is the case with me. I had a lot of intrusive thoughts. So, this obsessive fear of punishment, hell, or being bad, cognitive dissonance, confusion between what you were taught and what you now believe, hypercritical inner dialogue, having that really loud inner judge, difficulty making decisions, fear of getting it wrong or disappointing God. And again, that comes to outsourcing your authority to somebody else, lack of autonomy, um, and then loss of meaning or identity. You can feel untethered after losing a worldview that once explained everything. And I think this is a really normal process that most people go through. If they choose to leave religious or spiritual group that has been damaging to them. So, do you have any thoughts on any of those?
We'll go through a bunch of slides here. This one being the mental impacts of religious trauma. Each one of these, I want to note again to the audience that, especially if you're born into this system, there's definitely effects if you're a convert as well. But if you're born into the system, you don't have anything else to compare it to. If from day one out of your mother's womb, you're a Jehovah's Witness or a Latter-day Saint or a Scientologist, it is how you understand the world. And so the system gives you these things, but they're all under the guise of being best for you, safe for you, the right things for you. And so you end up running into sort of your mind being warped around false ideas, and then you'll spend the rest of your life trying to make sense of those.
Yeah. Yeah. And so on the emotional level, I think a lot of people will connect to this, but the constant shame and guilt, especially around sexuality, doubt, or not being good enough. This is very, very prevalent. Fear of abandonment or punishment. And I think this comes from sort of fear-based parenting that may extend from religious sort of structures. Where it's that conditional, if you do good, you're rewarded. If you do bad, you're disconnected from. So then you have this upbringing that reinforces that you will be abandoned if you don't follow the rules, which trickles right down from a lot of these high demand religions. And yeah, in the Mormon culture, especially, they talk about, if you're an apostate, then you go to outer darkness. Is that the general belief?
Yeah,
So
that's it.
that's a pretty big consequence for simply walking away. And then having a lot of grief come up and the feelings of betrayal. You're going to have to mourn the loss of your leadership, community, and in many cases even God. So that's a big one. And then if you were taught to bypass your emotions, then you can come out of this sort of like emotionally numb. So you really don't feel much of anything. It's hard for you to connect to your emotions. And I had a client actually recently who had a family system where people just didn't feel their emotions. They didn't talk about their emotions. There wasn't emotional literacy. And so she can't feel. She has a really hard time dropping into her body and feeling any sensation, which makes it really hard to address past trauma that she's gone through, because there's a numbness there. And and so that can happen in sort of stoic spiritual families as well, where emotions aren't really validated or worked with. And then finally, this is common for so many people, is the eruption of anger or rage or resentment. Sometimes at yourself. There are people that may feel this around, feeling like, I was duped, and how did I not figure this out sooner? And then feeling anger and rage towards the system and those who caused your trauma.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say here, because the next one you're going to go into is physical and nervous system impacts. This one's emotional. The one before was mental impacts. They're all connected. It would be highly unlikely that you would only experience one of these three. That almost certainly, if whether it's before you realize that the system has done these things to you, certainly after you realize the system has done these things to you, you're almost assuredly feeling things in all of these areas. They're all interconnected. And I would just note for the audience, as we're going through this, just sense what comes up. Sense, as we go through this data, what you're feeling, and whether your mind races to moments where you felt those things, that those things were handed to you because the system mistreated you or was set unhealthy expectations about you.
Yeah. And, um, you know, people can also, one of the emotions that's not on there is anxiety, and fear loops. And, you can feel these things and notice these things before you leave a system, um, and maybe not tie it into the system. There was somebody we were talking to that was talking about how every Saturday they got this sort of sense of dread, and they felt this for years, and eventually they tied it to the dread of having to go to church on Sunday because there was something that just wasn't lining up for them. But it took them a really long time to sort of put all the pieces together.
Yeah, and I've shared many times on the podcast that towards the end of my activity in the church, when I would leave church, my hand would be shaking.
Mm.
I would have headaches every Sunday afternoon, and it wasn't immediate that I put two and two together. I used to always look forward to church. I was excited on Saturday because church is tomorrow, and it's for me, it was a fun place to be. And then I couldn't figure out when I was leaving church sometimes why my hand was shaking. In that particular, the main instance I've shared in the past, I did know, but I would often have headaches in the afternoon. I'm like, why do I not feel good? Why do I feel crummy? And it's only sometime later when I'm further into the deconstruction process that I go like, oh, well, yeah. I mean, if I sit and listen to lessons and talks and uh, curriculum and instruction that tells me to suppress my authentic self, tells me I have to fit in to be part of this group, that there's punishments that lie in store if I don't, then of course my body is going to take all of that and it's going to show up in ways that indicate that something's wrong here.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so, that speaks to like these somatic symptoms that's on the list here. And somatic symptoms are more likely to happen if you have a disconnection from your feelings. So if you are not paying attention to or honoring your feelings, which all feelings basically show up in the body, then you're more likely to have these sort of somatic symptoms that get turned on that are trying to get your attention. But the physical and nervous system impacts on the body can be hypervigilance, this high uh, this high level of needing to scan the environment to make sure that you're safe. A high startle response. I had this for a long, long time actually. My nervous system was in such high gear that I would get startled by everything, and then I had, unfortunately, a reactive rage response. So if somebody came up behind me and tried to scare me to be funny, I would immediately turn around and slug them. I couldn't even help it, but it was like it would have this startle and rage reaction. Um, of course, different somatic symptoms, which this is part of my larger story, but I had a lot of chronic illness and lots of different symptoms that came from being in a perpetual state of unsafety, sleep disruptions, insomnia, nightmares, nighttime anxiety, dissociation, numbing out, checking out, feeling again like that disconnection from your body, and then relapse into stress states. So moving from dorsal shutdown to sympathetic activation, and having this sort of seesaw pattern in your nervous system is common response to religious trauma or any trauma.
The only thing I'll note here, there were moments in my time in the faith where I was under immense amount of stress, sensing that something was wrong in this religion. And then I would have sleep disruptions. I would have nightmares. I would wake up from these really detailed dreams. And then because the system tells me that it's the one true faith, I try to interpret those dreams from an insider's view, meaning that I would apply meanings to them that would have me being the bad guy because I'm not living up to the standard of the faith, when in reality, it was my mind and body telling me, you just got to get on board here. Something is not healthy about this system you're in.
Yeah.
And I think unhealthy systems are always telling us how to interpret our thoughts, our feelings, our dreams, and that is a way to sabotage what's really going on. They essentially take something and rebrand it so that it helps their cause rather than deal with it as it is, which would be important for you to acknowledge and to process and to heal from.
Yeah, and it's all about suppressing your truth, and but it's going to come up in your body, like your body knows. And when where's this internal conflict about something, you're being told from one place, and an internal knowing that you have on another, or just your body's own needs that are suppressed or emotions that are suppressed, it's going to come up and express itself.
Yeah. Now, the next slide you've got is for healing, but I wonder if we could just take a minute and go to another spot in the slideshow for a second to show
Yeah.
folks something. So I'm going to take yours down. I'm going to add this back up to the screen here. I wanted to spend just a few minutes being specific about the various things that it does. I don't want to go through all of these. If anybody is interested in each of these slides, there's like 10 of them. Pause the podcast, take time to read these. But I just want to note the ways in which unhealthy religion shows up in your world and controls you, tries to control you. So you have authoritarianism and control, and I'll give one example here: demands unquestioning obedience in critical thinking. Lack of transparency; it conceals information about its history, its finances, its policies, its decisions. Spiritual manipulation and abuse: uses scripture or religious teachings to control, shame, or coerce members. So I'm just giving one example from each. You can pause that and read each of them. Hypocrisy and double standards: preaches high moral standards but doesn't personally live by them. Maybe the leaders are in trouble for the very things that they punish the members for. And this happens in all unhealthy systems. Elitism and narcissism: believes they are specially chosen by God and above criticism. In our faith, we have a quote from one leader that says, it is wrong to criticize leaders of the church, even if the criticism is true, which
Mm.
is such a strange thing. Financial exploitation: pressures members to donate excessively, sometimes tying it to blessings or salvation. Suppression of individual thought and expression: discourages personal study, discourages outside research, discourages the questioning of doctrine. Protection of abusers and institutional loyalty over justice: covers up misconduct, including sexual or financial abuse, to protect the church's reputation. Fear-based tactics: uses fear to keep members in line, fear of losing salvation, being cut off from family, or eternal punishment. And the last one: resistance to change or progress, clings to outdated traditions even when they harm members. So it's so proliferated throughout the entire system, and you couldn't, on the inside, when you believe it and you haven't gotten through deconstruction, you don't have a clue what are all the ways in which it does this to you. It is pervasive. And it wasn't until I was on the outside of my religion and looking back at it as an outsider that over the course of the last, say, 5 years, 10 years, I was able to take a bunch of experiences and go like, oh, I see it this time for what it really is. I see what they did there. And I'll just note for people: give a lot of grace to yourself, give a lot of grace to others around you. It will literally take years, if not decades, to unravel all the ways in which your religious system, your spiritual system, abused you, manipulated you, and set you up to experience this kind of trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say the same is true for me. When I finally left, I don't think I understood, and I still don't. You have done so much work to sort of uncover all of the unhealthy patterns in the church. I felt them, but I didn't have a name for them. So it's interesting to kind of go over your work now and have a name for some of the things that I felt, and to understand how deeply unhealthy it really was. So
Yeah, like I said, it is pervasive, and you will not, until you're on the outside, you'll just not be able to see the scope and breadth of it. It's just beyond the magnitude of what an insider could even begin to notice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, please.
And I was just going to say, I'd love to, if you're open to it, to ask you a few questions about your own experience inside Mormonism.
Yeah, let's have a conversation. So go ahead. And whatever you ask, let's give you a chance to answer the same question as well.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. So, first question is, how did you begin to heal?
Yeah, I'm going to put something back up on the screen. So what first got me on the track to realize that I was normal and it was the system that had problems was to read books from an outsider lens. So the books that were most impactful to me, bottom left-hand corner, Faith Shift by Kathy Escobar, and she walks a person through what it's like to have your faith shift in a religious system. And she was speaking in generality. She would sometimes have specific examples, but this was not a book about Mormonism. It was a book about religious deconstruction. And as she expressed how folks could go from a binary black and white view inside their religion, thinking all is well and everything is true, to realizing that this thing sets you up to think certain ways. And in reality, it is doing unhealthy things. And many of the things that it imposes don't actually hold up. That book was crucial. Another book is the top right corner, Margaret Placentra Johnston, Faith Beyond Belief. And she is doing research and she shares a whole host, I'm going to say 50 personal stories of people who lost their beliefs and how they transitioned through that. So it was a great chance to get to know the personal stories of others that also had nothing to do with my religion. There's like one or two examples from my religion. The other, 48 of them were from some other faith. The most important book is the one in the middle. It's why I made it the largest. I highly recommend this to anybody who is even beginning to notice that they think differently and approach life differently than the way their system would tell them. The Critical Journey, Stages in the Life of Faith, Janet Hagberg and Robert Gulich. And what led me into these books was I started hearing things about James Fowler's Stages of Faith. And Fowler was a social scientist who did research on various people at various ages in their life and how they responded to religion. And he noticed that there was a trajectory, that there were stages that people moved through, and that people often started off at one spot, and over the course of years or decades, they would transition in that faith from one stage to another. And so I said, like some of this is just normal humanity. So that was a big deal. Starting a podcast, again, not everybody does this, very few people do, but starting a podcast was huge for me. I got a chance to put my voice out into the universe, and then people came back and said, that resonates. You're not just, because I thought I was alone for the most part, that there's only a small number of us that were experiencing this. And what I got back was, no, you're not alone. A lot of us are experiencing this. And the way you describe it resonates with us too. So I knew I was onto something. And it gave me the inner strength to just trust that this process was legitimate, that there was something real about thinking this way and wrestling with these things. So both other people's experiences, being able to voice my own, were huge helps to me. But much of the healing has really come about after being out of the system. And I'll be the first to say, this episode doesn't mean you have to leave your church. You don't need to be, we're not telling anyone they have to leave their religion, but you should at least be safe to notice what doesn't align with your gut and intuition about what is healthy and what isn't, and that you should feel safe to draw attention to it and to notice it and to speak to it when appropriate, rather than to hide and obscure and stay away from it because the system is scared of you being honest about what you're going through, about your questions, or it threatens you because it doesn't want you to challenge the faith of others. But that's, at least for me, a chunk of the things that helped me heal. your story is so different from mine. What led to you beginning to sense that healing could begin, and what began that healing?
Well, again, like I pointed to before, when I was working at that rafting company in Jackson, Wyoming, and my first awareness was like, wow, you can be a good person if you're not a member of the church. And that's when I kind of made the decision that I wanted to leave, because my experience inside the church was so painful. It was a torment. I didn't get anything positive from the church other than a sense of fitting in, which is very different from belonging. I never felt like I belonged in the church. And I felt like I was just a pretender all the time. And so the only thing that was keeping me in was this idea that I'm a good person if I'm a Mormon. Like I can somehow save myself, or um I don't know. I don't know what I really don't know why. I think it, was probably because my friends were in it, and it was just part of what I thought you did. So I finally had this moment where I could emancipate myself, and I chose to leave. And this was back in 1997, by the way. So it was a lot longer further away than when you left. And so I don't remember having access to any specific books on religious deconstruction. But what I did do that was helpful is I joined a bunch of like online spiritual forums. Back in the day, they were pretty basic. But I started interacting with people and asking questions like, what is truth? What is God? What is, because my framework for who God was so negative and fear-based and punishing. And I knew I had to get away from that. And so I started reading like Marianne Williamson and um, Richard Bach, and I had a few friends that I was able to have like really deep discussions with about just spirituality in general, and that sort of opened me up and helped me to reconnect to a different version of God, which to me was very healing. To have a God that was more unconditional and allowed for m- forgiveness and mistakes and whatnot, and so that was kind of my first entry into that.
I do want to take this is probably a good moment to put this up on the screen.
Mm.
Healing religious trauma involves. This is a slide that you created. Do you want to mention these?
Yeah. So, as with all trauma, the foundation of healing religious trauma is going to also be around rebuilding safety in your own body and nervous system. And like I was just sharing in my own process, part of what helped me create more regulation and safety in my own nervous system was redefining my experience of God, like redefining who God was. And I went from this conditional, fear based, punishing God to a God that I defined ultimately as completely and totally unconditionally accepting, compassionate. And I was sharing this with someone else. Someone had asked me this question recently, and um, there was a certain point that I came up with a phrase that I felt encapsulated who God was. And it was, something that maybe God would communicate to me. And I would use this to kind of to bring a little bit of regulation into my system. But the phrase is, nothing you could ever do could disconnect you from my love. And that phrase just represented this God that was, and the God that I had no form, no gender, no whatever. It was just this kind of, I don't know, ever-present being, and that I felt was outside, that was I was connected with and that supported me. And not everybody needs to have that version of God. Like whatever God or not God you you have is totally fine. But I utilize that as a resource to help to build safety in my own body and nervous system, and that's what translated it for me. So that's a really big part. However that looks for you, is okay. Another aspect is being able to touch into the grief around all the loss. So, when you leave a group or an organization, you lose community, you lose your sense of identity, and you can often lose meaning. What is life? What is my purpose for being here? It was, you had this very specific um, doctrine about what it all meant and how it all worked, and now you have to sort of redefine that and redefine your own sense of meaning. So, do you have anything to reflect on any of those?
Um, every one of those on some level is something that folks have to go through in order to process the trauma that happened to them. So, uh, rebuilding safety in your own body, you have to be able to be present with you and what you're feeling and to detach it from what the system defined all those things as. Grieving loss, yeah. Uh, you have this family that is handed to you. We call them, in our faith, we call them brothers and sisters,
Mhm.
everybody. We say, this is your ward family. And these people interact with you in a way that has you feeling that safety of family connection. And yet when you deconstruct things and you no longer buy into the paradigm the way they tell you you have to, it is almost inevitable that many, if not most of those people will disconnect from you.
Yeah.
Uh, Exploring spirituality on your own terms. Again, you grew up with this small lens of what religion is, what the one true religion is. And there is a whole world out there of books and podcasts and conversations to be had with your neighbor or your friend or your family member. And it is far beyond the really small box of things that the system said was spirituality and was truth. And so you
Yeah.
have to gain some safety to go out into the world and to take on learning with now a new openness that I'm just going to search for truth wherever it is and see what resonates. Setting boundaries. We were just in the conversation we were talking about throughout this episode with folks last night. They had intimated that family members of theirs, the moment they were no longer in the church, stopped inviting them to things. And even when they accidentally invited them, they would immediately reach out and uninvite them to a birthday party or a family outing. And so you would get an invitation from your brother about your nephew's birthday party, and they accidentally sent it out to the whole family group. And then they ended up, because they're on the inside of the church and you're out, they message you again and go, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to send that to you," or "You're actually uninvited to that thing." And so you realize that people and again, the system teaches them this, but people use whether you believe or disbelieve in the religious system as the way in which they decide whether they will interact with you. The religion corrupts and sabotages your family and friend connections, and the church imposes on them that they need to choose the church over you. And so the way they display their loyalty to the faith is by distancing themselves from you, which makes no sense because you're their brother, you're their child, you're their parent, you're their friend. But this is what they're taught to do. Uh,
Yeah. And
oh, go
no, I was
ahead.
just going to say also, you have people on the opposite side who will continue to try to save you, right? They see you as a lost sheep, and so they will invade your boundaries by constantly asking you to read the scriptures more, or or they give you sort of a lecture on different things, and so in those instances, it's really important to be able to set boundaries with people who are trying to sort of uh, unhealthily bring you back into the fold. Um, yeah. And then the one that you missed talking about was this reclaiming autonomy and critical thinking, which I just want to highlight is something that I think you have brought to your listeners. I think you have sort of you have what's the word I'm looking for? Demonstrated this through example of how to sort of utilize this idea of critical thinking and ask questions and be curious about stuff. And I think that's been really valuable to a lot of people who tune into you.
When
Um,
you mention toxic folks, the way I define, at least in part, this isn't going to cover all of it, but what I've noticed is that when someone thinks their religious system is true, and that religious system tells them to go out and proclaim the message, and that anyone who is pushing back against you is influenced by the adversary, is being used as a tool by Satan,
mm,
they're being influenced by the devil, it gives you permission to exert an unfair amount of privilege into a social situation. So, whereas in a normal world interaction, you and I both have a right to say what we think. We have to do so respectfully. We have to be cordial, but we have the right to disagree with each other. In this paradigm, the person who believes their religion is true thinks that they have, because their system says so, an inordinate difference of privilege. They have the privilege and you don't. It's their right and responsibility to put you in your place, and it is not your job to share with them anything about what they're doing that's wrong.
Yeah.
And it's a distortion, and it's why it's so important that you learn how to set boundaries with people, healthy boundaries with people, because it's the way in which you protect yourself from people exerting a fake, distorted amount of privilege that they don't actually have.
Yeah, absolutely. Another aspect of this is tending to your inner child parts that have been shaped by fear, shame, and unworthiness. And I will say that these parts were very much alive. They're still alive inside me. But the experience I had in Mormonism really, really harmed a lot of my inner child parts. And so, they will often show up, and it's my job to sort of turn towards them and reassure them, bring them comfort, and give them counter messages to what they received inside that religious institution. And that's a huge part of healing from that. And then this last one, which is a really, really big challenge for a lot of people, is finding new sources of belonging and connection. Of an organized religion and spiritual community is such an easy place to go to connect with people. And when you lose that, you're kind of left isolated. And so being able to kind of find new resources to belong and connect can be a real challenge. And that's something that you and I talk about all the time, how to sort of create a space that's healthy, that we can moderate as a group, that allows people to have that autonomy, and that is inclusive, and that really is a healthy space for people to connect and support each other. And it's not easy to do.
You mentioned that this is not an easy one. I want to say more about this. This is sort of a touching thing for me. And I just want to grant this really is hard. So first, it's people who don't fit in with their religious system who are distanced away from it. You either don't fit in because you know it's not true, or you don't fit in because whatever other reason. And so I'll just note that folks who are quirky or seen at times as maybe being a little strange or weird, the kind of that we folks who are put into that box are much more likely to end up on the outside of our religion. We already know we don't fit in other ways, so we have a quicker ability to notice that we don't fit in the belief structures of our faith. And when you move out of religion, sorry, I've got traffic going by with a bunch of noise, but when you move out of religion, it's one thing if you're in Utah, you're in Idaho, you're in an area where, again, I'm speaking to those who come out of Mormonism. If you are in a geographic location that has a high propensity of people who came out of your religion, you're in a highly Catholic area and now you're no longer Catholic, you might have an easy time finding folks who have been in the similar experience as you, which is an easy way to build immediate connections. But if you don't live in an area that has a high number of folks who have left your faith, this is going to be a struggle. And if you already don't fit in other ways, you're a little quirky, this gets really difficult. And I don't have any perfect solution, but what I've always told people is you got to put yourself out there. You have to find ways to create or attend spaces where people are present and be your most authentic, honest version of yourself. And when you sense that there's any connection, take the lead on following up. Create the second opportunity for those people to hang out with you. And it works to various degrees. It's a really hard thing to do. And I have a lot of empathy for folks who don't exactly fit in, who didn't fit in their religion and are having a hard time finding a new community. And it's so important. And there isn't a magic formula that, hey, you do these 6 steps and then in 6 months you'll have 10 friends that really love to be around you. Like it really is one of the harder things when deconstructing your religious system and having your religious community step away from you.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And one thing I'll just add for people who are struggling with this is, if you're not able to find your community of people yet, you can sort of take the time to kind of get to know yourself a little bit more. Take the time to learn how to connect and belong to yourself. Doing a lot of that inner work is taxing and time consuming, and in the space between when you leave something and you find something else, you know, date yourself, like get to know yourself on a different level. Find out what you like and don't like. There are ways that you can sort of build this internally, and then when you get really settled with knowing who you are to a deeper degree, I think connection actually is a little bit easier after that. So that's one thing to consider as if anyone who's in sort of this middle process.
What's your next question?
My next question is, what were the turning points for you in rebuilding your sense of self?
What were the turning points for me in rebuilding my sense of self? I go back to what I said in the first question, which is I had all these books that I read, and they helped me to understand that what I was going through was just normal humanity. I wasn't the first person to go through it, and it wasn't just my religion that it was happening in. And so the moment that I realized that this was just normal human stuff, I opened myself up to going like, "Hey, I bet there's a whole beautiful world out there full of things." And so I started exploring through books and podcasts just interesting uh educational, informative things out in the world. I started listening to Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, who at times are very contradictory. And I went like, "Oh, I don't need to take sides. I can just take the truth from each of them and disagree with both of them if I do."
Mhm.
I started reading things from Richard Rohr, who approached waking up from a religious perspective. He's a Catholic monk of some sort or another, and he was advocating a position of like, yeah, Catholicism is just a tool. Yuval Harari, *Sapiens* was a great book. Christopher Ryan and Ciselda Jetha, *Sex at Dawn* was a great book. Um, uh, *Guns, Germs, and Steel* by Jared Diamond, great book. And I just started taking in truth. And again, most of my journey is an intellectual journey. It's not a embodiment kind of thing. And then one of the things that I did in the last few years is I started seeing a therapist who specialized in internal family systems, IFS work, and that got me into my body much more. Noticing you mentioned parts earlier, the various parts of me and how they had dealt with everything that had happened behind me, and my ability to be the grounded, centered self amongst all those parts and to take in what they had to say, but to begin directing my life to be lived in a grounded way that had me practicing integrity with myself.
Mm.
So there was that. How about you?
For me, as I said before, I did a lot of exploring of different spirituality. I redefined my perception of God. But the turning point for me, as far as being able to rebuild my sense of self, came through therapy. So when I was ready enough to kind of start to meet a lot of my wounded parts, I worked with different somatic therapists and started reading a lot about the nervous system and trauma. And that's when I got a deeper understanding of what had really happened and the impact it had, and how to sort of find the lost me inside all of that, and how to integrate the wounded parts of myself, and so that was a huge turning point in my ability to kind of take my healing in a to a deeper place. Yeah, so it was really really important, not very pleasant work. Sometimes it's really incredible, but for me, it's definitely very necessary. I wanna ask you another question, which is, How did your community respond when you started questioning or leaving the church?
So when I first started deconstructing, I was a sitting bishop when I started to say these things out loud. So because I'm a bishop, I have a little more weight with the things that I say. And I tried to start imparting some nuance at the ward level. And I also went to my stake leaders. So for those of you who are not Mormon, uh, the ward is the local congregation. I was the ecclesiastical leader for that local congregation, and I was responsible for assigning talks in our sacrament meeting, our main meeting each week. And so I would assign talks and have people begin to sort of dip their toes into some of the messiness so that we could correct some of the historical nonsense that Mormonism had perpetuated. Also, though, I was starting to tell my stake president. Now, the stake is the regional conglomerate of local congregations. So, if you take 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 local wards or congregations, there would be a stake that would be oversee all of that. And so that is led by a leader called a stake president. And the stake president, I would sit with him because he was responsible for me as the bishop. I would sit with him and I would explain to him that I was having questions and some things didn't add up. And there were a lot of people in the church who were hurting over those things. The initial reaction I got, Teresa, was that they wanted my input. They wanted me to help them sense what they could do better to prevent this from happening. But when I went to them with the truth of that, which is you would have to turn all of this upside down because our history isn't told accurately. We manipulate people with mechanisms that aren't appropriate. And where the church is the one that's again, I don't say this verbatim, but what they're getting is the message that the church is the problem. Their reaction is then, oh, no, 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 no. Let's shut this down. Let's not talk about this. And it only goes so far. As I deconstruct further and I start to be more of my authentic self, I start to concern myself less with fitting in. That distance grows and grows to the point where when I moved out here to Utah, all of the people I served as bishop, and many of them go, Bill was the best bishop I'd ever had. Even though he's lost his belief and I don't agree with the path he's gone down in terms of that, he's the best bishop I've ever had. So many of them just don't, like their trust of me is gone because I went into an intellectual exercise and decided that my faith system was not only not true, but it was also not good. That violated the truth they needed to hold. And so it just created so much distance to where it'll just never be what it was. I've had instances where those people have spread rumors about me that were just blatantly not true. I've had situations where those people have written me letters trying to put me in my place in the rudest of ways. I've had instances where they've reached out to media outlets when conversations were revolving around conferences that I was participating in, or in my excommunication process, which was covered by the local news here in Southern Utah. And they would reach out and put comments into the comment section of the news article and say things that were either blatantly false or were just hurtful, knowing the friendship that we had had. And anytime you leave a high demand religious system, that system absolutely is training its members both explicitly and implicitly that if you don't look the part, that their job is to get away from you as fast as they can and create distance. The Amish shun, the Jehovah's Witnesses shun, Scientology shuns, Mormonism shuns. Every one of these high demand religions have a system in place that shuns members who no longer think, talk, act the way the system wants them to think, talk, and act. And so for anyone out there who have been through this, you recognize that immediately. More importantly, I would say to the folks who are inside listening to this and are just on the front end of beginning to think these things, recognize that these relationships are a lot more fragile than you think they are. And not that you need to hide your true self, but just be aware of that so that every step along the way, you're in some ways prepared that this is potentially there and probably will to some degree happen.
Yeah, that sounds really painful. And I'm sorry that that happened to you. And I know it's part of the process for a lot of people. And people are going to have a sense of fear and protection, when somebody leaves a system, but that doesn't make it any less painful. And yeah, to be disconnected from in that way and to be criticized has got to be really hard. So
I've got a question for you. Describe a moment where you felt spiritually violated or emotionally manipulated in the name of faith. Is that?
yeah, um, this is taking me back to, I don't know, 1990 something. No, I'm thinking of girls' camp, somewhere in the 90s, and I was probably maybe 14 at the time, and not having grown up in a family who practiced Mormonism, I was very much an outsider. So I didn't know what all the norms were. It wasn't normal for me to pray in public. It wasn't normal for me to bear my testimony. Those things were really foreign, and I was also very introverted and shy and terrified of that. And I remember we were having the last night, like the campfire sort of testimony meeting thing. And, everybody took their turn and bore their testimony. And then they got to me and they were just, the bishop was there and the young women's leaders, and they were all looking at me, expecting me to bear my testimony, which I didn't even know if I had at the time. I definitely believed in all of the hellfire and damnation kind of thing. I was so afraid of what sin was going to do to me and where I'd end up in my life, in the afterlife. But I didn't have a testimony because I didn't really even know the doctrine very well. And so they sat there, quietly waiting for me and trying to put all this pressure on me. And I remember looking at them and finally just saying, no, I'm not going to go. And they continued to keep pushing me. And I just held firm because I had nothing I could say. But I remember being really feeling just so violated and terrified. It made me want to be less part of those groups because I felt so much pressure to perform in a way that I really couldn't. So that's what comes to mind for that. And I'd like to turn it around and ask you the same question, actually.
Yeah. I was 17 years old when I converted to the faith, 19 years old when I got married in it. And again, for non-members, although most of our audience are those who are or were in the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, commonly known as the Mormons or the Latter-day Saint Church. When I got married at age 19, Mormons are taught that the really only acceptable, righteous place to get married is in the temple. And the rules have changed a little bit, which actually plays into this story, and I'll get to that in a moment. But at the time, if you got married civilly, you just went to a justice of the court or had a minister marry you like most human beings do, then I would have to wait a year before I could go to the temple and get married. It's sort of a punishment for not doing things the right way. And you're taught that if you were to die during that year, you wouldn't be sealed to this person. So there's a lot of pressure to conform to getting married in the temple. And to do that, you have to keep the rules. You have to keep the law of chastity, which is to not have sexual relations outside the bounds of marriage. You have to be paying a full tithing. You have to be keeping the word of wisdom, not drinking coffee and tea, because God cares a lot about that. And there's a bunch of other rules. You have to affirm your belief in the leaders of the church and in the things that they teach. And I did all that. And I go to the temple to get sealed to my then spouse. And my parents aren't members of the church. They can't go. Non-Mormons can't go to the temple. They can't attend. And my mom got hurt bad. She had 2 kids, me and my brother. And she had spent her entire adult life up to that point looking forward to the moment that her kids would get married and what that would mean and what that would look like. And rather than it meaning and looking like what she had had in her mind, I was doing it in a way that she couldn't participate in. And it hurt her bad. And I was given by the church, I was given lines of reasoning to use. And at the time, those lines of reasoning sounded great, but they weren't. One of them, for example, was to use the biblical story of the Levites carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and the Ark gets unsteadied, and somebody from the crowd runs over to try to steady it, and they're struck dead. And the idea is that certain people have certain responsibilities to do certain things in God's kingdom, and somebody who doesn't have that responsibility, it's not, even if they're trying to do the right thing, it's not their right. They can't. And so as I tried to express to my mother why she couldn't go see her son get married, I used that scripture and that line of reasoning to try to explain to her why this is just the way it is. And it hurt her. And it took several I want to say months, but it was actually about a year and a half before my ex-partner got pregnant with our first kid. And when that kid was on the way, then grandma realizes she's going to be a grandma. It's the first grandkid. And so she sets this grudge down, and we put things back together. Fast forward years and years. Now, that was awful. If I go at the time, as soon as I started deconstructing, I realized that this religion had created a line that had fractured me and my mother's relationship, had put distance between me and her when that never should have existed in the first place. But now I fast forward in the church in recent years. My mom died of cancer back in 2018. And sometime in the last few years, the church changed its policies so that somebody can now, today, get married civilly, and the very next day they can go to the temple and get sealed. And what the church is in effect saying is that we never needed to do that in the first place. Yeah. It was never something that was actually the way God felt about how things should be done. It was just us human beings doing human being things, and we just didn't get it quite right that first time, which told me it was completely unnecessary for the harm and hurt and trauma that I caused my mother by preventing her from being able to go to my marriage with me, with my ex and I. And that was more devastating than her not being able to go in the first place, because I now sense that it was just unnecessary. That all of this ordeal was completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
And it was, to me, that was horrific.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to ask you, trauma's trauma. You know, you and I were talking about this the other day. Religious trauma, in terms of like, I get bumped into, it hurts, it's not right, it's unhealthy, my body and brain process it in certain ways. I think that's very similar, whether it's religious trauma or family abuse trauma. But is there anything you want to say about how religious trauma shows up in the body, or any way that you experienced religious trauma and how it showed up, that at least the audience could get a feel for what they might sense or perceive within themselves?
Yes. So for me, so I was baptized at 10. And after I was baptized, I remember doing it just to get the missionaries off our back. And then 2 years later, I started going to church with my best friend so I could fit in. And so I kind of did the Mormon thing. But the doctrine, at least the doctrine that I did take in, which was around, like what happens in the afterlife, what sin is, which kingdom of glory you're going to go to, all of that stuck in my system. And that's kind of what I used to sort of frame some of other events that happened in my life. So there were some traumatic events that I went through. And because of the church's framing on all of that stuff, I experienced a deep trauma around that. And I started to have panic attacks. I had extreme anxiety, obsessive thinking, OCD expression. And this was such a torment for me. So that's why I say, like, I never experienced anything pleasant or supportive in the church. It was always just trying to fit in. And trying to figure out a way to survive what I assumed was coming for me. And it was an extremely painful experience that went on, like, when I talk about obsessive compulsive thinking, like it was an hourly thing that I would go over and over and over this thing for years on end. And it eventually eroded, I think it, dysregulated my nervous system to an extreme degree. And later on, it showed up through chronic illness. By the time I was 26, I had my first symptoms of chronic fatigue and a whole lot of nervous system dysregulation that showed up in a lot of really strange symptoms like dizzy spells and feeling like I was going to pass out, and a lot of fatigue and all kinds of stuff. Like, like I said, panic and high anxiety and difficulty regulating my temperature, all kinds of things like that. And so, yeah. And sorry, talking about this again is actually, it is dysregulating for me just to even go into it, just to revisit that time and thinking about what it was like for me and how under-resourced I was. And there was nobody for me to go to. There was nobody that I felt like was going to offer an extension of care, understanding, support. I felt like, even if I were to go to the bishop and confess whatever sins I thought I had committed, I was fearful that the bishop was going to punish me in some way, like that whatever sins I had committed were so bad and so egregious that there was no opportunity for forgiveness. And I want to sort of talk about one aspect of the Mormon Church, which I think is really interesting. There are other Christian traditions that, still talk about heaven, hell, sin, like where you're going to go, all that kind of stuff. But the Mormon Church has a very distinct way of sort of, yes, there's this concept of sort of binary heaven versus this tiered Mormon afterlife. And I think this makes a difference in how you internalize and how hard you strive and how much preoccupation you have about where you're going to end up or what it's going to look like. So in the traditional Christian model, you're either saved or you're not. Salvation hinges on this faith in Jesus, not perfect behavior. And I remember hearing that in other Christian faiths, like, well, if you just believe in Jesus, then you're saved. And I was like, really? That's all you have to do? Because that's not what I was taught. Like, you got to work really hard. Like in Mormonism, it's hard work to get to the celestial kingdom. There's room in many Protestant traditions for, grace, human fallibility, and there's this sort of assurance of salvation. And then, in the Mormon Church, it's completely different. So I remember when I was younger, because I had internalized, any sort of mistake I'd made, I'd sit there and think like, oh my gosh, how bad is it? And like, does this need to be confessed to the bishop? And if I confess, like, am I going to get punished? It was this constant fear cycle. And I would sit there and think like, well, maybe I'll make it to the celestial kingdom. Like maybe the third kingdom, I can hope for that. Like, but then I would think to myself, well, if I confess to the bishop, then I'll probably get to the third kingdom. But if I don't confess, then I'll probably end up in outer darkness. So it was just this constant weighing of like, what do I do? And I couldn't figure out the right choice. So I just stayed silent and suffered. The one thing I will say that saved me in the Mormon Church was, and this is a really sensitive topic, so just be warned here. I was in so much internal pain during this time that I did not want to live, and I'm saying this with a little bit of humor, but the reason why I chose to keep living was because I knew if I had committed suicide that I would definitely go to outer darkness. So on some level, it sort of prevented me from taking drastic measures. But there's one more slide I want to show around this. I don't know if you can put it up. One after this. So yeah, these are just sort of all the conditional things that you have to do to make it to the celestial kingdom. This is why it's so different in the Mormonism tiered model than just a heaven or hell model. Because you got to stay morally clean. You got to sustain your leadership. You got to marry in the temple, raise your children faithfully, keep your covenants. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, which puts so much pressure on people. And then I asked ChatGPT to sort of break this down. and talk about like the psychological impacts of tiered salvation, how this impacts people. So this concept of like scrupulosity and perfectionism, which is something I definitely had going on. You're always wondering if you're doing enough to qualify for the highest kingdom. Comparison and self-surveillance. Where will I end up? Where will my family members go? Am I progressing or backsliding? Fear of eternal separation. This is the one that I actually think is the most cruel in Mormonism. Is I realize that a lot of people love the idea of, oh, families can be together forever. However, if one of your family members ends up in another kingdom, no, you cannot be together forever. So even if you make it to quote unquote a heaven, you are still feeling this separation. And I think that that is one of the drivers for people who, if they have a family member who leaves the church, there is this fear within them that they're never going to get to see that person again, or that person is not going to be able to make it to the celestial kingdom and be part of the family again. And I think that that is a very cruel and painful dogmatic belief.
Yeah, on the front end, as a convert, you're told you could have an eternal family.
Yeah.
And you're like, awesome. That's great. And then from baptism till the day you either die or stop believing in it, you live with the fear that what that actually means, that is, if all of us in this room, all of us in this family are not perfect about this process, we actually will be separated. So it actually is a fear tactic rather than some positive thing like you think it is on the front end when you first hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this whole tiered salvation idea ends up perpetuating this shame-based motivation system. So you have to prove your spiritual worth. And then, so on an embodied level, kids raised within this framework often live in, like I did, this chronic sympathetic activation, repetitive thought loops about worthiness and repentance, which I literally an hourly basis, that's what I thought about. It drives you to be to do this fawning behavior, people pleasing, and rule following to feel spiritually safe. And I actually see this a lot in Mormonism. Mormons are some of the nicest people you will ever meet. Like, and there's like Mormon lingo. They're like women in the church tend to have this sort of sing-songy voice and pattern of speaking. And that all sort of falls into this category of fawning behavior. And then finally, for some people, there can be this dorsal vagal shutdown where, once you feel like you failed and there's no way out, you're too far gone. And so people can end up in really dysregulated or unhealthy shutdown states in their nervous system.
And you put this in the slideshow, but I'm going to segue to it. If folks are going, I'm a Mormon and, it's just not that bad. I'll just note, and you can speak to this, but the current president of the church, Russell M. Nelson, he's believed and held by the membership of the church that he's a prophet, seer, and revelator. His wife, Wendy Watson Nelson, is by education, training, career, she is a therapist and a diploma holding, graduated with the credentials therapist. What do you want to say here?
So much. Oh, you told me about this a few months ago, and I remember you pulling it up on your phone to show me because I didn't quite believe you. And when I read the description of what the book's about, it's about a bunch of kids that have created this club called the Not Even Once Club, and it's where they've promised each other to not break the commandments, not even once. And it encourages parents to give this to their children as a wonderful format for how they can learn how to keep the commandments, because they're not going to sin even one time. And again, it speaks to the pressure within Mormonism specifically about this idea that, and what I was kind of trying to get to before when I showed those slides, is that there are two conflicting messages that come from Mormonism. One is, Jesus died for you, and he has died for your sins, and so there is a pathway forward for you to go to heaven or whatever. However, they also encourage you, don't ever like you can sin, you'll be forgiven, but just don't do it. Like, I'd really rather you not do it. And I want to show one other slide because I don't know how many people in Mormonism have gone to a child's baptism, or how many people have maybe even presented this story. But I have one nephew and three nieces, and so I've had to attend some childhood baptisms because my brother is still active in the church. And on several occasions, I have, heard this same story, and I can't remember if it was actually told at my baptism or not. I was dissociated at the time, but I find it so triggering to hear this story, and they offer this allegory about how, when you're baptized, you're completely clean, like receiving a brand new set of perfectly white clothes, and the clothes are perfect, they're pure and spotless, and that's how your soul is. And since your sins have been washed away, and then they're told that from this point forward they need to be really, really careful, not to get those white clothes dirty. So they should avoid sin, stay worthy, obey the commandments, and live righteously. If they do make mistakes, they can repent. But there's still a subtle, not so subtle sense that the purity has been compromised, or that it's a struggle to stay clean enough. And again, these subtle messages within the church are what affected me so much. It was like, even though you're told, well, you can repent and you'll be forgiven, you kind of won't really be, like, you're really not supposed to do it in the first place. So it felt like any kind of mistake that I made as a child was like I had a black mark on my record. I dirtied my clothes, and it was a stain now. Like, maybe I could wash them, but they weren't really going to get clean. And I think it's incredibly, incredibly damaging. So yeah, I just wanted to bring this up because this is a huge aspect within Mormonism that causes this kind of trauma.
Yeah, many of us were taught. I was taught. I know lots of people have said it, repeated that they were taught this thing, which is that if you sin, yes, like you said, there is repentance, there is this atonement. If you really don't want to do that thing again, and you don't do it again, because if you do it again, it's as if you never repented. So it doesn't matter that your brain tells you to do a thing over and over that isn't a sin at all as far as the world goes, but for which Mormonism has some rule about. And if you violate that, you repent of it, you've been forgiven, you violate it again, it's as if you never repented. All that original sin comes right back on you. The other thing that, and what I was trying to start to say, is that the thing that I'd been told, that I know others have repeated, so I know they've been told it too, was that if you sin, Jesus will have additional suffering. So we go back 2,000 years ago. This person named Yahshua Bar Yosef, Jesus, son of Joseph, is alleged to be the savior of mankind. He suffers in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's crucified on the cross. In the garden, Mormons teach that he actually performs the atonement, the majority part of it there, where he suffers for our sins and bleeds out of his pores blood. That his, it says in the scriptures that his sweat were as great drops of blood, and Mormon theology has it literally being blood coming out of his pores. And there's conversations about how much stress the human body would need to be under for capillaries to burst. So you sort of understand the agony and the pain that Jesus would have gone through to bleed out of every pore. And then we're taught that if in 2025 I commit a sin today, that actually that sin now retrofits additional agony to this person who suffered 2,000 years ago. He now has to suffer just a little bit more. And so there's, as you point out, there's this constant fear of sinning today for lots of reasons, whether it's taking on the stain of sin that we're supposed to be white and clean and keep ourselves unspotted from the world. Whether it's the, not even once club, where we have fear that if we're not a good enough Mormon, people will notice that and will be excommunicated. Young man has a normal issue of masturbation, and he's told to abstain from the sacrament for 6 weeks. And now every week he goes to church, and everyone in the congregation sees this young man not taking the sacrament. And everybody sort of in their head knows what the heck that's connected to. At least they're guessing. And so there's the shame of that. Mormonism and all unhealthy religion is about control, and shame and manipulation are two sides of a coin, and they're used extensively in those religions to get people to do what they need them to do and to be controlled. So I'll just note that. I want to move into healing. And so I want to just note, I'm going to take this off the screen here and add this back up. I just want to note a few. I think this previous slide was that last one we went into earlier. It is. Okay. So I'll just note one more time. I'm going to run through 5 or 6 things here that note what religion does to you. Betrayal of self, spiritual gaslighting, and identity suppression, why it matters. High demand religion. Religions often teach members to distrust their own thoughts, emotions, and intuition. You're taught to second guess yourself in favor of the spirit or the brethren. As a believing Latter-day Saint, I was taught that there's no such thing really as intuition. There's the light of Christ and there's the Holy Ghost. And if my gut says something and that contradicts what the leaders of the LDS Church have taught, then I am to distance myself from what my gut is saying and to explain it away as being deceived by Satan. Only when my intuition matches up with what the leaders in the theology of Mormonism says, am I allowed to trust my gut? So this idea that all of us humans are given an intuition, an ability to sort of know what's right for us, what's wrong for us, and make sense of the world around us based on what we feel about what our needs are and what works best for our humanity. That is sabotaged. And instead, it all has to be filtered through what the church is right or thinks is right or wrong. So that's why this matters. Okay, so here's one. The weaponization of belonging, conditional love, and fear of rejection. Belonging is a human need. Religious trauma often arises when belonging is made conditional, which means instead of you being you and belonging just as a natural act of being a human being in the world, now you have to fit in. You have to suppress parts of yourself, compromise parts of yourself, and pretend to be things, wear a mask in order to be things that this thing wants you to be, that this religion wants you to be. And so whether it's on belief, obedience, worthiness, etc., but when you compromise yourself, it doesn't feel good. It's not a healthy way to live out your life. We all have to do it, even just in the normal course of life. I go to my job, and I have to be a certain thing. When I worked at the pawn shop or worked at the floor covering store, I had to be a certain thing to my employer. I wasn't allowed to just come in and be exactly myself. But when the nature of getting back to God, all the religious, spiritual threats that hang over your head, when you compromise not just moments at work, but days, weeks, years, decades, and in many instances, an entire lifetime, being something that's not actually you, it is traumatizing. Eternal stakes and existential terror, salvation anxiety. When you're raised with the belief that eternal consequences hinge on your behavior, in belief, it creates existential trauma. Again, separation from loved ones, we talked about that. Spiritual abuse, hiding behind love, or saving souls. Truth is trauma. When you realize that the truth claims are false and manipulative, cognitive dissonance, epistemic collapse, the whole epistemological foundation collapses. What do I trust now? When you're given an entire way to see the world, when you're born out of the womb and your family is Mormon, and then you're 45 years old and you deconstruct Mormonism and go like, oh my goodness, that was never true to begin with. And there's a whole world out there that I didn't even consider. You now have to make sense of all of that, and that will take you years, if not decades, to do. The colonization of the body, purity culture, consent, embodiment. High control religions often invade the body, especially through purity culture, modesty teachings, and teachings about sex. And so again, you're given false views and expectations about sexuality and what it needs to look like. So the Mormon will date a girl at BYU for 2 months, propose to her, get married, all because she's a good Mormon, he's a good Mormon. This is what they've been living their entire lives to do. And then now they're 50 years old and they realize that they should have based their relationship on compatibility, on common interest, And now that neither one of them is LDS anymore, they realize that the entire foundation of that relationship was falsely created by a religion without their ability to explore the world and to find out. I read the science on this, which is you need to be able to date on average about 17 people before you understand what you need out of a relationship, and you can understand what you're looking for, and you understand what you bring to the table, and you've worked on some of the things that you've needed to get better at, that you can actually be a quality partner, and you can find someone who matches with you well. And most Mormons are marrying the first or second person they're in a serious relationship with. So there's that. So I'll just note that as well. And then I wanted to just take us here to the final part, which is healing, and talk for a moment about what healing looks like or feels like. And I'll just read through this first page, and if you want to read the second page, and we can talk about any of these that strike us. 10 signs of healing from a religious or spiritual trauma. One is self-trust is rebuilt. You once again value your inner voice. You no longer trust the system to dictate what is true or not. You realize that the authorities of your religion are just as full of error as the people they said were full of error. There was a documentary where a guy pretends to be a spiritual guru called Kumare. I highly recommend people watch it. But the tagline in it is "The guru is inside of you," and that's so true. You get to a point where you no longer trust. You certainly value the wisdom of everyone in the world, but you no longer trust anybody to be your guru. No one is your spiritual authority. You get to take in information and make the best decision for yourself, because you're a unique, complex life form, different from any other complex life form on Earth. Hence, there is no rote formula for what it is that you need. It's all going to vary. And so you finally trust your inner gut. You stop living in fear of eternal consequences. I hear people on this side of things say, I've got one life to live, and as far as I know, it's a dirt nap after, or if it is something else, I couldn't possibly know what that is here. I'm just going to live my best life and just trust that all that takes care of it. Embodiment becomes priority. You mentioned embodiment earlier. You reconnect with your body, learning to feel it safe in it again, honoring its sensations, its needs, its desires, rather than overriding them for the sake of religious ideals. And the religious person will go, oh, I hear what you're saying. You're saying you can do whatever you want to do. You can just do whatever your body or brain tells you that you want to do. And that's not it at all. On this side of things, I make way more wise, informed, grounded decisions about how I'm going to live my life. It's not like anything goes. It's instead, I know what's best for me. I know what it feels like to be Bill. I know what it means to show up with my integrity and to be consistent about who I am. And this is how I'm going to move through the world, treating people right while also respecting who I am and what I need. So boundaries are no longer selfish. You set boundaries without guilt. You say no. You distance yourself from toxic people and ideologies. You see that as sacred self-care. I love that. It's not just self-care. It's sacred self-care, not rebellion. And then the last one on this page is you welcome curiosity and you hold space for complexity. You move from black and white thinking into nuance, into the gray area. You allow the questions to be beautiful, not dangerous. So I think these are all great signs that healing is taking place in you. And I'll let you take us home with these ones.
All right. Well, I want to go back to one thing first.
Please.
But I can't because you have control. Okay. So all of these, by the way, are translate exactly to any kind of trauma. But it is cool to see it in the context of spiritual trauma. But one of the ones that I think is really cool, which a lot of people struggle with, is that you welcome curiosity and hold space for complexity. This is a really challenging one. It goes hand in hand with being able to sit with uncertainty, which is something we have to sort of, develop greater capacity and tolerance for. And if you think about this one in particular, and you think about how many people in the world are struggling with polarization and getting stuck in different political ideologies or spiritual ideologies, you can sort of tell where they are on their healing journey based on how capable they are of holding curious and holding space for complexity. So I just wanted to point that out. And at some point, I think you and I are going to do a podcast on what makes us all so divided, because I think that's a really hot topic right now. So
It sure is on
to
my Facebook page.
it is. So, so in addition, so you redefine spirituality or you let go of it altogether. And I kind of love this because everybody has their own sort of process for how this goes for them. Some people do let go of spirituality altogether, or a formal sort of spirituality, and some people embrace it. And we were at Thrive a couple months ago, and Britt Hartley gave such a beautiful talk, and she was talking about how the idea of spirituality or being spiritual is not limited to what we often think it is. You know, taking your kids to school can be spiritual. There were so many different ways that you can sort of practice spirituality that don't have to have a definition. And so letting go of a defined sort of spirituality is perfectly fine and okay, and how some people eventually reconstruct. So the other ones here are: you no longer need to prove or perform for your worth. You can choose to belong to yourself rather than fitting in with others. And this one is so vital. Being able to sort of, that's what happens when you start to honor your own impulses and truth and knowing, is you do begin to belong to yourself. You understand who you are, and your system becomes fully aligned and harmonic, I guess. Like you don't tend to have as much conflict with, I don't know, like this is what helps people heal from physical conditions that are connected to trauma as well, is when you kind of when you fix that integrity internally by choosing not to perform. Another one here is the process of grieving and giving yourself all the time you need to grieve and mourn the loss of your community, again, your identity, the time and effort you may have invested in an institution or religion, without minimizing or bypassing it. And nobody likes to experience grief. I think it's a really difficult emotion to feel. But if you can give yourself permission to just touch into it or even titrate with it, meaning, you feel it for a second and then you move towards something that's a little easier, and then you come back to it and move towards something that's a little easier, it can kind of help the process. And just, again, give yourself enough time to kind of move through it. Another one here is you stop seeking a final answer. You're no longer chasing the one true church, the one right path, or the singular worldview. You find beauty in fluidity and self-defining meaning, or self-defined meaning, which I think is actually really beautiful. And then this one's fun. You notice that you laugh again, deeply, freely, unapologetically. Humor returns. Joy isn't suspicious. And I can't read the rest because there's this slide. But anyway,
It says life starts to feel less like a test and more like a playground.
I love that. I think that's great. Giving yourself permission to be a little bit less serious and to bring back joy and reconnect to things. And joy is one of the qualities of being in ventral vagal. So if anyone watched our earlier episodes on the nervous system, we talk about ventral vagal state is that place of self-connection, connection to others, social engagement, and it's where we feel joy. So I love that.
Well, we did it. We got through. This is going to be about 2 hours long, and I thought it was exceptional, by the way. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. These are the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about week in and week out. I'm really excited about a person, a neighborhood, a community, a nation divided, and how we have respectful conversations about stuff coming up. I want to give you a chance to give any sort of final remarks about this topic and anything else you want to say before we close out the episode.
I'm just going to remind people that healing is possible. It's a journey, to be kind to yourself, to lean into self-compassion as much as possible, to explore different ways that resonate with you for healing, or a new way of kind of connecting with spirituality on your terms, however that looks, and just trust in your own process.
And I'll just add here, folks, we'd love to hear from you. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please leave us a comment. By the way, hit the up button, the like button. Please subscribe to the channel, but leave us a comment. Let us know about your religious deconstruction, the trauma you experienced, if you want to share that, what was helpful to you, leaving any resources or tools that you found helpful will be beneficial to anybody else who's watching the episode. Any of your comments about how this show went or other topics you'd like to see us cover, please don't hesitate to leave in the comments. We very much appreciate your engagement. And with that, I think we've wrapped up another episode of the Almost Awakened podcast. Hope you've enjoyed it. Teresa and I have had a lot of fun putting this together for you, and I think these conversations are really important. So we'll see you next week for the next episode of Almost Awakened.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the Almost Awakened podcast. For more tools, resources, and real talk about conscious living, visit almostawakened.org. That's almostawakened.org, your resource for waking up